Hello, welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Indiho. Joining me from his home in Arlington, Virginia is Shaka Sally himself, aka the Kamale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Ndugu Paul.
How are you?
I remain simple, easy, and as some of my fans have suggested, an awesome son of Mother Africa. But I have to say, sincerely, and I'm saying this from the deepest, better part of the bottom of my Cavalry heart and soul, that you look hugely terrific in that beautiful, gorgeous shirt.
Like I told you, I'm trying to aspire to be a fashionista, trying to create my own line, uh, my own label here.
I think by now you should have gained the confidence that you can actually play ball. You could
Coming from
actually
you, I'll
play
take that
ball.
as a compliment.
Yes, you could actually play ball in fashion major leagues.
I've learned from the best.
And you could, by the way, count on me for being one of the valuable customers.
Thank you, sir.
You're most welcome, Ndugu Paul.
Let's start in West Africa, where vote counting is underway in Guinea. They went to the polls on Sunday. As we speak, they're still counting the ballots, and I think the first provincial results are expected to be announced after 72 hours. Alpha Conde, 82 years old, who is running for a controversial third term.
To talk about third terms almost being controversial in Africa, perhaps it is better to borrow the controversial, controversial name, which some say is in fact not a third term, but perhaps a third term. You know, what is interesting and sad at the same time when it comes to the Republic of Guinea, whose capital, of course, is Conakry. This is a country, Lugupor, which started on the right foot. You're talking about the second black African country to regain her political independence from Europe. In this particular case, of course, from France. Guinea regained her political independence in 1958, a year after the Gold Coast, which was renamed the Republic of Ghana, had 1 year earlier, in 1957, regained her political independence. And Guinea started on the right foot because it had a man who was a former celebrated trade unionist by the name Sékou Touré. The French wanted to be different from their fellow European colonizers of Africa, the British. And so General Charles de Gaulle decided to conduct a referendum because he didn't really want those countries to be independent. He wanted them to stay or remain within what he called French Commonwealth. And so they actually conducted a sort of referendum whether these countries wanted independence or whether they wanted to remain within the French Commonwealth of sorts. It was only the Republic of Guinea under Sékou Touré in 1958 which decided to become politically independent. And guess what? For that reason, it was very, very badly punished by France. France tried to make it an example of when you say no, when you say yes to independence, that is what could happen to you. You cannot believe it, but when you read the history of that period and the country called Guinea, the French said, fine, you can in fact be politically independent, but on one condition, that everything that was made in France, we would have to remove it physically. You cannot believe even a ballpoint pen, what we call sometimes at home a dry pen, made in France, was removed from Guinea, Nduguporo. Price. This was the price that Guinea paid for regaining or attempting to regain her political independence from a European power known as France. The rest of the countries voted for no independence. So it wasn't, in fact, until 2 years later in 1960 that Paris changed its mind, or rather figured out another way of controlling those countries which supposedly were going to be independent by making sure that France controlled the budget. Those countries would have to use the CFA, the French national currency, and it would be controlled back home, quote unquote, in Paris.
You just brought up a very good example of how France reacted when Guinea decided to gain its independence. They threatened by taking everything as an example to the rest of the other countries that were still aspiring to be independent countries. But then what happened to their policy of assimilation? I thought if you could speak French like a Frenchman, dress like a Frenchman, and you allowed the French in at the time, you automatically became part of that the French stronger culture. Therefore, there was no reason for the French to come and take everything that belonged to the French in Guinea.
You see, fortunately for Guinea, the founding president, Sekou Toure, was not, first of all, a very highly educated individual. He had not been educated really in French universities and all that kind of stuff. He was a trade unionist, a an organizer of people. He said that we would rather be poor and free rather than be rich and slaves. So basically, he and his people decided sincerely to break away from France and regain their political independence so that they could, in fact, begin to use a sort of an administration to live a sort of lifestyle that reflected the values of indigenous African culture. It may be interesting to learn, Ndugu Paul, that the man we are talking about, Alpha Conde, the incumbent president of Guinea, who happens to be 82 years young. This is a man who spent many, many years in France, was teaching in universities. Earlier, he had in fact gone to school at the Sorbonne, the premier French University of Paris. He had also interestingly studied in Moscow at the Patrice Lumumba Friendship University. But this man, interestingly, who had spent decades in the political opposition, who had in fact at one time been sentenced to death during the Lansana Conte administration and later his sentence was commuted and pardoned. This man was the first person in modern Guinean history to be elected in an election that was seen to be free, fair, transparent, verifiable, and credible. In effect, he was the first democratically elected president in the history of the Republic of Guinea. And yet, this man, for some reason, has decided to set a negative precedent by, for example, violating the constitution under which he actually came to power. The constitution that he actually took an oath of office to preserve, to protect, and to uphold, by essentially doing a little bit of political maneuvering to such an extent that he brought about some kind of political arrangement that resulted in the political constitutional shifting of the goalposts so that it could allow him to actually run for the third term that I had earlier told you some critics, in fact, refer to as the third term. So it is very sad, frankly, because one would have expected that if there was anybody who would really have been on the side of promoting democracy in Africa in general, and in Guinea in particular, it would have been President Alpha Conde. I had, by the way, an opportunity last year to be invited to a dinner which he had offered some leading Africanist dignitaries in Washington, D.C. And we had an exchange of, we basically had an opportunity to compare notes. Very interesting man, an intellectual. And yet, here we are. He is not any different from Alassane Ouattara in West Africa, not any different from the Ugandan president, Yoweri Museveni, not different from Theodore Obiang of Equatorial Guinea. These are people who fit in a category where they and their supporters have come to the conclusion that these people are uniquely gifted leaders to the extent that they are like political God's gift to their countries that their countries could not possibly do without their leadership.
Talk maybe about these leaders who think are too clever to change constitutions. Take, for example, a new constitution was approved in a referendum in March that argues that Mr. Conde is allowed to seek re-election, even though he has already served the maximum of 2 terms. It's increasingly looking like some of these leaders, like you said, he's a highly educated guy, he's very smart, so he figured maybe he could take advantage of what was going on, because at the end of the day, politics is looking at the different opportunities around you and figuring out how to exploit them. So some critics argue that he exploited those loopholes that were in the previous constitution now that allow him, after having successfully amended the other constitution, that allow him to run for another term. The 2 terms he has served under the new constitution really don't matter.
Yeah, when you think about it, when you look at it in the context of the law, the legalities or the legalisms, he is right on the money. But the issue here is not the law, Ndugu Paul. The issue here is, does he in fact have legitimacy? I think that most people, most observers of the Guinean politics would probably arrive to the conclusion that, yes, his attempt at the presidency for the third time may in fact be legal. But the question is it legitimate?
Again, going back to maybe the point I made earlier, there is nothing illegal here. They went through a referendum. People gave him the mandate. The people of Guinea decided to change the constitution. After all, a constitution is a working document. You can amend it and change it anytime, as long as the people buy into it. So his argument was like, maybe what we have is not working very well for us as Guineans at this particular point in time. We need to go back and amend this constitution to allow certain things, certain provisions that lead us to the future. And this is exactly what they did. So what's wrong with a leader who is so clever, who thinks that at 82 years old, he has too much to offer for that country, to change a constitution to allow him to stay in power for another term?
To your point, Ndugu Paul, you are right in saying that he has actually played by the rules, at least legally. But as I was saying a little bit earlier, yes, it may be legal, but the question is it legitimate? I know as well as you do, even though I did not go to any law school, that a constitution, yes, is indeed a living document. And yes, in fact, it can be amended. And it should be amended where the amendment is a reflection of vital national security interests. But where the amendment is a reflection of personal, selfish, parochial, political gain, this should really be a totally different ballgame. Because at the end of the day, we are talking about a nation here. We are not talking about an individual. And we are talking about democracy. And therefore, we are sincerely not talking about the idea of l'état c'est moi, King Louis XIV. We are not talking about a man who at one time used to be president of Tunisia, Ahmed Bourguiba, who used to say that I am the system and the system
Is me.
Is me.
That's a good transition. Let's go to another interesting topic. Let's talk about the ICC and how it's mainly prosecuting African-related cases. Currently, there are 10 cases under investigation, 9 of which involve African countries, namely Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda, Central African Republic, Kenya, Libya, Cote d'Ivoire, and Mali. As we speak, the International Criminal Court delegation is in Sudan to discuss the prosecution of former President Omar al-Bashir. Your thoughts, Shaka?
Yeah, first of all, I think that the idea that the International Criminal Court targets Africans, on the surface, may look like it makes sense. But when you, in fact, go deep into the history of the Rome Statute, which was agreed upon in Rome, the city of Italy, in 1998, and later was in fact put in action in 2002. You will find that some of the founding signatories were in fact from Africa, including the Ugandan president, Yoweri Museveni. He was one of the original founding signatories. And when you come to the issue of Uganda being the first country to refer the case of Joseph Kony, the head of the Lord's Resistance Army, you find that it is the state of Uganda, which of course is a member of the International Criminal Court, because the Rome Statute, by the way, is the one that established the International Criminal Court, which is based in The Hague, in the Netherlands.
Yeah, Sudan is not a signatory, though.
That is true. Sudan is not a signatory. But wait, you see, there is an exception that can actually be made. If, for example, the United Nations Security Council can agree that the ICC can expand or extend its jurisdiction to a non-state member, given the weight of the crimes that have been committed against humanity or genocide. That is the category under which Sudan and the former Sudanese strongman, Omar Bashir, was indicted and came into being, and is in fact on the verge of probably being handed over to the authorities of the International Criminal Court. The United States, for example, was one of the key countries in the late 1990s to promote the idea of the International Criminal Court. But ironically, the United States of America is not a member of the Rome Statute. The reason being that the Senate did not ratify the articles.
United States recently, by the way, put a travel ban and imposed sanctions on the ICC, including the leading prosecutor Fatou Bensouda.
That is true. As a matter of fact, the court is seen to be largely political because it goes for the small guys. Even in the context of Africa itself, you had, for example, Uganda referring the case of Joseph Kony as the first case, by the way, to the ICC under the then Argentinian chief prosecutor, Luis Gabriel Moreno Ocampo.
But Uganda has since shifted goalposts on the ICC.
That is why I said, even in the context of Africa, it seems to me that in fact, leaders or rulers go for the smaller fish. But when it came, for example, to President Omar Bashir, who was the first African leader to be indicted, Uganda for a while initially remained consistent, to the extent, in fact, that Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni stated that if Omar Bashir, the then president of Sudan, were to overfly the Ugandan airspace, that he would actually be arrested and be handed over to the authorities in The Hague. So was the then South African president, Jacob Zuma. But subsequently, they shifted goalposts, obviously for political purposes. When it came to the African leaders, and this largely started, in fact, when there were also warrants of arrest against the Kenyan president and his deputy and others. When the African rulers realized that suddenly the political fire was in their bedrooms, if, for example, Omar Bashir could be handed over, then who knows who would be next? They basically started shifting goalposts.
There are critics who said that the former president Bashir is wanted by the ICC on charges of genocide, the war crimes, and crimes against humanity. But there are those who also say that, for example, they cannot prove because it's been a very long time. And secondly, those charges that were committed in Darfur, really, he was not directly in charge of what was happening in Darfur.
I think those people have a point that you just made. But at the end of the day, who are we? We have to wait for the process to play out. If indeed the International Criminal Court judges in The Hague find out that they do not have incontrovertible evidence that is not liable to falter, then, of course, former Sudanese president Omar Bashir will be released.
Would other critics be right to say that the International Criminal Court is targeting Africa inappropriately? Why should Africans trust this system of justice?
Most of the African cases which were referred to the authorities at the International Criminal Court were in fact referred to The Hague by the African governments themselves.
But not Sudan, though.
But
Sudan was referred.
No. Yeah, but I'm talking about most of the cases.
Would you agree with some analysts, some pundits who have said that maybe it's about time the ICC itself looks itself in the mirror and maybe starts addressing some of these concerns or have genuine reforms at the ICC? Because we cannot talk about them dispensing justice that is quote-unquote seen as biased towards Africa.
That is a perception. The reality is different. The African leaders or rulers did it on their own political volition, on their own political initiative, probably because they thought that that court would help them fight their political adversaries. Little did they know that at some point, that same court could actually come specifically for them. I think at the end of the day, it is the African countries, sincerely, who should come up with very strong, effective, and neutral systems of judiciary. African countries should come up with courts that are respected, with courts that can indeed be seen to be doing justice for their own people.
We have to end it there. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome.